Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the material you all chose, which is all about motivation and achieving goals.
Sounds like a popular topic.
Absolutely. It's something that everyone struggles with at some point, right?
For sure.
And we've got some really fascinating sources to dig into, including stories about Jeff Haden's grandfather and a racehorse, plus some interesting perspectives on how motivation actually works.
Oh, can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah, it's really going to challenge some conventional thinking, I think. Get ready for some seriously actionable takeaways.
So I'm curious, what's the common thread running through these sources?
Well, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was this idea that motivation isn't actually the starting point for success.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, you usually hear the opposite, right? Like, you just got to find the motivation.
Right, exactly. You know, we often think we need that burst of inspiration to get started, but these sources argue that it's actually the other way around.
So you're saying motivation comes after you've already started making progress?
Exactly. It's a byproduct of success, not the catalyst.
I see. Well, how do they explain that?
Well, they use this great anecdote about Jeff Haden's grandfather and his racehorse. He was so focused on winning races, so fixated on that end goal, that he completely neglected the training process.
Oh, I see where this is going. You missed the whole point of the journey.
Exactly. He skipped all the hard work, all those little steps that build up to success. And because of that, he ultimately missed out on that real sense of satisfaction.
That's a powerful analogy. And it really resonates with how many of us approach goals, I think.
Right. We get so caught up in the destination that we forget to enjoy the journey. Or even worse, we don't even start the journey at all because we're waiting for that elusive motivation to strike.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that sometimes.
Me too. But these sources, they actually back up this idea with some interesting science, about how our brains work.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Okay, so you know how some people go to those firewalking events, like hoping to get a big motivational boost?
Yeah, I've heard of those. Never been to one myself, though. Seems a bit intense.
Right. And these sources argue that those kind of events, while they might offer a temporary surge of inspiration, they don't really have the staying power for lasting change.
Makes sense. Like, you might get all fired up for a day or two, but then what?
Exactly. The real driver of motivation, according to these sources, is those smaller, incremental successes that we experience throughout the process.
Oh, I like that. So it's not about these grand one-time events, but the cumulative effect of all the little wins along the way.
Precisely. It's those small wins that trigger the release of dopamine in our brains. And that dopamine, it's like a reward signal that makes us feel good and motivates us to keep going.
So we're basically chasing that dopamine hit.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And each time we get one, it reinforces that positive feedback loop. And that's what fuels our desire to keep striving towards our goals.
Fascinating. So instead of waiting for motivation to magically appear, we need to start taking action and racking up those small wins.
Exactly. It's those small wins, those earned successes, as one of the sources puts it, that create that lasting motivation.
Earned success. I like that term. It really highlights that motivation is something you build, not something you just find lying around.
Right. It's not this magical thing that just happens to us. It's something we actively cultivate through our actions and our successes, no matter how small.
I see. Okay. This is already making me rethink my whole approach to motivation.
It really does flip the script, doesn't it?
It does. So if motivation comes from success, how do we set ourselves up to achieve it in the first place? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, good question. And that's where the concept of process comes in, which we'll dive into right after the break.
So how do we set ourselves up for that earned success?
Well, that's where the concept of process comes in, building a system for consistent progress.
Process, huh? I think a lot of people hear that word and immediately tune out. It sounds kind of boring, to be honest.
Yeah, I get it. I used to think of process as something only those less talented people needed. Like if you were truly gifted, you could just wing it and succeed.
Right. Like those naturally gifted athletes or musicians.
Exactly. But these sources really challenge that notion. They argue that process is actually essential for anyone who wants to achieve their goals, regardless of their talent level.
Interesting. Do they give any examples?
Oh, absolutely. They talk about the incredible career of Michael Ovitz, who went from working in a mailroom to becoming one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood.
Wow, that's quite a jump. What was his secret? Just raw talent and ambition?
Well, talent definitely played a role, But these sources emphasize that it was his meticulous process that really allowed him to thrive.
So you're saying that even with all that talent, he still needed a structured approach to reach the top?
Exactly. He didn't just wait for opportunities to fall into his lap. He created them through a carefully crafted system.
Fascinating. Okay, so what exactly did this process look like for him?
Well, from what I gathered, he was incredibly disciplined and organized. He had routines for everything, from how he managed his time to how he built relationships. And this allowed him to consistently make progress towards his goals.
So it's not just about working hard, it's about working smart.
Absolutely. And one of the sources actually argues that routines, far from being restrictive, can actually be incredibly liberating.
Liberating? How so?
Well, think about it. When you have a routine for those everyday tasks, you free up so much mental energy. You don't have to waste time and willpower making decisions about mundane things.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like putting those things on autopilot so you can focus on the bigger picture.
Precisely. And this then leads to another important point that these sources emphasize: the power of limiting your goals.
Wait, hold on. Limiting goals. I thought the idea was to dream big and set ambitious goals.
Of course, dreaming big is important, but these sources suggest that when it comes to actually achieving those dreams, it's crucial to focus on one or two key objectives at a time.
Okay, I'm listening. Why is that?
Well, spreading yourself too thin across multiple goals can be incredibly draining and ultimately lead to, less progress overall.
Yeah, I can see how that could happen. You end up feeling overwhelmed and not really making significant headway on anything.
Right. By focusing on just one or two goals, you can channel all your energy and resources into making real progress.
And probably experience those smaller successes we were talking about earlier, those dopamine hits.
Exactly. And those successes will then fuel your motivation to keep going.
I like it. Okay, so we've got process and we've got limiting goals. Anything else?
Yes. Another important point that the sources bring up is the danger of seeking validation from others, especially when we're working towards a goal.
Oh, interesting. I've always thought that sharing your goals with others can help with accountability and motivation.
Yeah, that's a common belief, but these sources actually caution against it.
Really? Why is that?
Well, they explain that when we publicly announce our goals, it can create this false sense of accomplishment in our brains. Like we've already achieved something just by talking about it.
I see what you mean. It's like we're getting that pat on the back before we've actually done the work.
Exactly. And that can actually sap our motivation to actually put in the effort. It's almost like we've tricked our brains into thinking we're further along than we really are.
That's fascinating and kind of counterintuitive, I guess. So maybe it's better to keep those goals to ourselves until we've actually made some progress.
Exactly. Let those successes speak for themselves, right?
Right. Okay, so we've debunked the motivation myth, established the importance of process, and learned about limiting goals and avoiding premature validation. I'm really starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Me too. And now I'm even more excited to dive into the practical strategies that these sources offer for putting all this into action. So let's get into those practical strategies. I'm all ears. What are some of the tactics these sources recommend for really making this process work?
Well, one that really stood out to me is what they call the I don't technique. It's all about using language to shift your mindset and reinforce your commitment to your goals.
The I don't technique. Tell me more.
Okay, so instead of saying, I can't skip my workout today, you would say, I don't miss workouts.
I see. So it's a subtle shift in language, but it seems to imply a much stronger sense of identity, right?
Exactly. It's not about struggling to resist temptation in the moment. It's about aligning your actions with who you are, who you want to be.
So it's about establishing those clear boundaries for yourself and sticking to them.
Precisely. It's about making those choices in advance and then just following through.
Okay, I like that. It takes the decision-making out of the equation, right? You've already made the commitment, so you don't have to waste energy debating with yourself each time.
Exactly. And this actually ties in nicely with another strategy that these sources talk about, working your number.
Working your number. What's that all about?
Well, it's this idea that success is often a numbers game. It's about consistently putting in the effort, knowing that a certain percentage of your attempts will lead to the desired outcome.
So it's not about being perfect all the time. It's about just showing up and doing the work.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't always lead to immediate success.
Exactly. And the sources actually use a great example to illustrate this point. They talk about Jeff Haden's journey to reach 1 million monthly page views for his articles on Inc.com.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. It seemed like such an ambitious goal, almost impossible.
Right. But he didn't just magically achieve it overnight. It took him years of writing, networking, experimenting with headlines, all while tracking his progress and making adjustments along the way.
So it wasn't a matter of luck or some secret formula. It was just consistent effort and a willingness to adapt.
Precisely. He was working his number, knowing that with enough effort and the right approach, he would eventually hit his target.
I love that. It's a really encouraging message,
Yeah.
that success isn't just about talent or some innate ability. It's about putting in the work and being persistent.
Absolutely. And speaking of persistence, these sources also emphasize the importance of embracing discomfort, of pushing beyond those self-imposed limits that we often set for ourselves.
I had a really great example of that recently. I was at the go-kart track trying to improve my lap times, and I was getting some advice from one of the professional racers there.
Oh, this sounds interesting. What did he say?
Well, I was going as fast as I could, pushing myself to the limit, but my times weren't really improving. And this pro, he just calmly looked at me and said, to go faster, sometimes you have to slow down.
Slow down to go faster. Now that's counterintuitive.
Right. It totally went against everything I thought I knew about racing. But he explained that I was braking too early before turns, which was actually causing me to lose speed. He told me to trust my instincts, to push a little further out of my comfort zone.
And did it work?
It did. I was hesitant at first, but I tried it, and my lap times instantly improved. It was amazing.
Wow, that's a great illustration of how sometimes we need to challenge our assumptions and embrace new approaches, even if they feel a little uncomfortable at first.
Exactly. It's about trusting the process, even when it feels counterintuitive.
And speaking of process, these sources also highlight the importance of being intentional with our time and energy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
How do they suggest we do that?
Well, they talk about this principle of doing more by doing less. It's about eliminating distractions, unnecessary commitments, and even those little decisions that drain our mental energy.
Decisions. You mean like what to wear or what to eat for lunch?
Exactly. Those seemingly small decisions, they can add up and take a toll on our mental bandwidth. By simplifying our choices, we can free up that energy for the things that really matter.
So it's about streamlining our lives and focusing on what's truly important.
Precisely. And this leads to another key concept that these sources emphasize, the 1% advantage.
Okay, I've heard of that. It's that idea that small, consistent improvements can lead to big results over time, right?
Exactly. It's about making those tiny changes, those 1% improvements in various areas of our lives, and watching those gains compound over time.
It's like compound interest, but for personal growth.
Exactly. And the beauty of this principle is that it applies to so many aspects of life, from our health and fitness to our relationships and careers.
And the sources actually provide a great example of this in action. They talk about Dave Kirpin and his daily habit of writing thank you notes.
Oh, yeah. He's known for his incredible networking skills, isn't he?
He is. And he attributes a lot of his success to this simple practice of expressing gratitude. It's a small gesture, but it has a huge impact on his relationships and his overall well-being.
It's amazing how those small, consistent actions can really add up over time.
It really is. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from debunking the myth of motivation to exploring practical strategies for achieving our goals. It's been a really eye-opening conversation.
It has. And I think we've even managed to distill all this wisdom into 10 key takeaways, which I think could be really helpful for our listeners to remember.
10 key takeaways. I love it. Okay, hit me with them.
All right, here we go. 1, motivation is a result, not a prerequisite. It comes from those small wins we achieve along the way. 2, process is king. A solid process is the foundation for consistent progress. 3, limit your goals. Focus on 1 or 2 at a time for maximum impact. 4, forget seeking validation. Let your success speak for itself. 5, master the I don't technique to reinforce your commitments. 6, work your number. Consistent effort leads to success, even if it doesn't always feel like it. 7, find a pro to emulate and learn from their expertise. 8, embrace discomfort and push beyond your self-imposed limits. 9, do more by doing less. Simplify your life and focus on what truly matters. And 10, remember the 1% advantage. Small, consistent improvements add up to big results over time.
That's brilliant. A perfect summary of all the key insights we've gleaned from these incredible sources.
Absolutely. And I think the overarching theme here is that success isn't some magical destination that only a select few can reach. It's a journey that anyone can embark on with the right mindset and the right tools.
Absolutely. It's about focusing on the process, embracing the challenges, and consistently putting in the effort one small step at a time.
And on that note, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final thought. Think about the area of your life where you want to excel, where you want to make a real impact. It doesn't have to be something grand or world-changing. It could be something as simple as being the best parent you can be, or the most supportive friend.
I love that. It's about finding your own definition of success and then pursuing it with passion and purpose.
Precisely. And you might be surprised by the ripple effects that even those seemingly small acts of excellence can create.
So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep pushing yourselves, and keep striving to be the best version of yourselves, whatever that may look like for you. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.